All right, everybody. So I am going to show you how to do your first lab. Um, so your first lab, you're going to click on week one. Basically, most weeks have a lab, some of them don't, and it says in your syllabus as well as the pages whether or not you'll have a lab. So in order to do your first lab, you'll need to read the chapters for the week and follow along with the PowerPoints. This is extremely important for understanding how to do the labs. After you do that, then of course you can take your mastery quiz because that's what will be on the mastery quiz. And then for this week, of course, we're going to be downloading R in RStudio. So let me know if you have any problems with this. If, for instance, you have an older computer, there might be some issues. So just reach out to me when you're going through this process if you need some help. Then once you have that, you're going to do the practice R code. So you'll download your R file, open it in RStudio, follow along with the instructions here. And this practice R code is where a lot of the code you'll be using in your lab will come from. Sometimes it comes from the practice R, sometimes it comes from the book, and sometimes it comes from weeks prior as we get a little more advanced. So that's where you'll want to check when I'm asking you to write some R code. Check the practice R codes that I gave you and the book. Okay, so once you go through that, the practice R code, now you are ready to do your first lab. So you click on the link. You can see our quarterly deadline on October 1st. It's worth 20 points. And you're going to have to upload it as a Word document. Every student has access to Microsoft Office and Word. You can download it for free if you don't have it. If you click on or Google search UNCC software uploads or downloads or whatever. Okay, so now a little bit of instructions. When you're uploading your lab, it's going to be a Word document, as I said. You're going to, in the Word document, put the lab number. So for this week, it's the first lab, so you'll have lab 1. Then you'll include your first name and your last name, and look at that, you'll get a whole point for it. So easy. And then I say you can see the template for an example. So this template is just supposed to kind of help you get an idea of what I'm looking for your upload. So I'll open it for you. Okay, so that's the template. It's the first lab. There's a student's name. And then, as you'll see later, I'll have some tasks for you. And sometimes for the task, you'll need to write an answer. Sometimes you won't. Okay, so the next thing, ensure your lab is in Monaco font. So when you turn it in, if you use the template, it'll already be in Monaco. This is just to ensure when you copy the R code, it's legible for me. Because some types of fonts make R look really weird, but Monaco doesn't. So that's why it's like that. Another 2 points. Okay, then you'll have your written portions, and this will be in the instructions below. And they're usually worth 12 points. In this case, you have 4 tasks that are worth 3 points each. And this is where you're going to be writing in your answers here. And as I note, where appropriate or when appropriate, put the task number as the header for your written portion so I can see what task you're addressing. So, if you're addressing task 1, write task 1, task 2, so on. And then at the end, you're going to have a section called R code. So in the template, we see that already made for us right there. And this is where you're going to copy and paste the R code that you wrote in the source pane. And then you'll just paste it into the Word document. And so this is how I can see the R code that you wrote without having you upload like a R file. It'll just all be in this one Word document. And so then I say, in your R code, label each section of the code that you wrote with a comment that corresponds to the task it's associated with it. So for task 2, if I asked you to take the mean of a bunch of numbers or something, in your R code, you'll write as a comment task 2, and then underneath it put the R, the actual code that you're using to complete that task. And so then I have written here, your R code is basically all going to be written in the source pane, unless I tell you to write it in the console pane. So just when in doubt, write it in the source pane. Yeah, almost all of it is written in the source pane. And this will start to make more sense as I show you kind of what to do when I open up the instructions. And so this is just remember to complete, to change that, this practice R file that you should have done already. Okay, so then you're ready to download the instructions. And here's just that same instructions again, where how to upload the correct document. Then you see your tasks. Task 1, you've already done that most likely. Just download RStudio, and then open RStudio. And remember, we're going to be doing all of our writing of code in RStudio, not R. We just need R to be able to run RStudio. So here I am. Here's RStudio. I'm just changing it so you can see. Now let's add the instructions. Okay, sorry, it's a little weird looking. The screen share was cutting off an important part of the window. Okay. So now you've basically done task 1. And if you're confused, you have your book, and then I have the video as well for you to look at on how to download R in RStudio. Okay, so then you're going to have your Word document that you're going to turn in. Again, you'll use the template. You'll write your name in there. And you're starting on task 2. Your responses are going to go there under task 2. So open up RStudio. And then you're going to open a new R script. And we're going to do this by you probably can't see this, but you have to click on the File tab up at the top and then hover over New File. And then we're going to open a new R script document. And so this is how you open new files to write more R code. Just like this one. This one just has the R code in it already. Okay, so that'll get you started. Now, you'll notice I'm asking you to write something in the console pane. So remember, our console pane is down here. This is where R tells you what it's up to and where we can write temporary code. This is super annoying that this is here. Anyway, 1 plus 3, help, sum, things like that. And so you're going to write some code in the console pane and then copy the description from the packages pane. So this area, right? I did help, sum. You're going to do something similar to that, and you see your description. Great. So that will be what you turn in for task 2. Then task 3, I ask you to go to a website that describes packages in R. And packages are just little add-ons that we could add to R to allow us to do different functions. And so as I mentioned, if it's overwhelming looking at all these different packages, don't worry about that. There's a gazillion different packages. You're not going to be familiar with all of these. Nobody is. But you will be looking for a specific package, and then I'm going to ask you to describe kind of the purpose of this psych package. This is something very handy for social science researchers with the functions that it has in it. Okay, so that's your task 3, and you're writing all that in your template, right? Oh, that's an old template. Okay. Now you're actually going to be writing some code in the source pane. So as I mentioned, if it doesn't say to write it in the console pane, just write it in the source pane. That's where the code is going. So you'll comment your code out to tell me what task you're doing. And then you're going to write your code underneath that. And all of the code that I ask you to run is going to come from the examples that I gave you in the practice R, or it'll come from the book. So you can look in the example R, the practice R, about how to make a vector. And you're going to make this vector that contains all these numbers. Then you're going to find the mean of this vector W and report it here in your template file or your upload under task 4. Then you're going to make a new vector from the old vector. And again, if you're not sure how to do this, you can go into your example code and see, oh yeah, we're making new vectors from old vectors here. We're making another new vector from an old vector there. And so here with this new vector called W divided, you're not going to report anything in task 4. That's fine. It's just going to be something I see in your R code that you'll eventually copy and paste and put into the document that you upload. And if you're confused, you need help, feel free to reach out to me on how to do this. Okay, then for the last task, we're going to make a mini data frame, a little mini data set. And again, you're like, oh yeah, we already did this. Here it is. Look. And in this data frame, we're going to have one column that stands for, or is called PID. And this is a participant ID. And when you're dealing with social science data, it's helpful to have this type of column where every person who is in your data set has a unique identifier, because we don't know who these people are. We don't know their names. We don't know anything about them except for the data that we collected on them. So it's helpful to have your first participant, labeled participant 1, second participant, participant 2, 3, 4, 5, so on, so that you can refer back to them if you need to. If you're like, oh, participant 1 has weird responses, they provided some weird data, maybe we should remove them. That helps you keep your data organized. So this is just describing the general purpose of the task, what you'll have as the outcome. The first thing you're actually going to be doing is rename your W vector as a new vector called income. And again, there's examples in your practice code that show you how to rename vectors, a new vector based on an old vector. So income will be our first, or really our only true variable in this data set. And as I mentioned here, because income is being created from W, we can see this will stand for income, but it's in thousands, right? So I just lopped off the last, 3 zeros. So the first person's income is 12,000, second person is 64,000, 30,000, 90,000, 15,000, 22, and so on. Now I'm asking you to use some code, and you're going to write it in the source pane so I can see what you did. And this code will tell R to remove your vectors W and W divided. So that'll clean up your environment pane. As you can see, my environment pane is totally crazy looking. There's way too many objects here. Yours won't look like that, but because I'm doing all these different studies and stuff, I have a bunch of objects. And this is not best practice. You should have things cleaned if you're not using them. So do as I say, not as I do, I guess. But so that's what you're doing there. You're just learning some best practices on how to remove objects you no longer need. And again, there's some example R code if you need a hint that'll help you. That's here, that tells you how to remove objects. Okay, now we're going to make an entirely new vector that's called PID, and this will represent each person's unique identifier, so a number that's labeling them. So person 1, it'll increase in sequential order for each participant. So there'll be the first participant, second participant, third participant, all the way up, and you'll figure out how many numbers you need to go up to by looking at what is now our income vector. That's one participant, that's the second participant, third participant, fourth participant, fifth participant, so on and so forth. So however many participants are represented here, you're going to have that many unique identifiers with your PID vector. And then the last thing that you're going to do is merge these two vectors into a data frame. And so what we're learning about here is that vector or data frames are really just vectors that are stacked next to each other. Let me find an example. Might be a bad example because it's kind of crazy looking. So here I have 6 variables. These are all just vectors in R. And then we told R to merge all these vectors together into a data frame. So now we have our rows, which are the variables, also called the vectors in R speak. And then we have the rows, which are responses from people. Okay. If that was confusing, don't worry about it. It'll all start to make sense later. The important idea is we're going to merge these two vectors that we just created into a little data frame with our rows and our columns, and we're going to label this object, this data frame object, income data. And so we'll use the same naming an object, setting it equal, and as you can see, we have some code in here that should help you understand how you can merge vectors together to make a data frame, a specific type of object in R. Okay, so while you're doing all that, that's all going to be in R, writing your code in there, so on and so forth. So you're going to have more code than this, obviously. And again, for task 5, you're not going to report anything in the actual Word document under task 5. There's no written section for task 5. How I will know that you've done task 5 is in your R code. So for each lab, there's going to be 2 things that I'm grading you on. That's the tasks, and then the written portion of the task that I asked you for. Sometimes that's the evidence that you have, and then sometimes it's the R code itself. So I'll look and see for task 5 for your points for that. Did they create the right vector? Did they merge these vectors together? So then once you have all your R code written, you're going to find the template or the document that you're uploading, and then you're going to copy and paste it. Again, you'll have more stuff here. This is just an example. So when you're turning all this in, you're going to have your written portion for these. For this particular lab, there's task 2 has a written portion, task 3, and task 4, and then your R code. You'll get 5 points just for uploading your R code. So again, this should be pretty straightforward, pretty easy, and part of those points will come from correctly labeling the tasks so I can clearly see what you've done. And then the points you're going to get for the written portion, you'll get your 3 points for correctly answering task 2, 3 points for task 3, 3 points for task 4. And then for task 5, I'll look to see what you did in the R code itself. And that's how you'll get your 3 points for task 5. Okay, so then, and as you can see, there's the rubric here that explains all these things. Then you'll go and you'll submit. You'll save your written portion, upload it. Again, it has to be a Word document, and everybody should have access to Word as a UNCC student. All right, so with that, that is how you would do your first lab. If you have any issues or any things that come up while you're doing this, feel free to reach out to me, especially as we're starting off here. It'll be, kind of a steeper learning curve, getting used to R, getting used to the different panes. There's definitely a lot of new information coming at you, and you will start to consolidate that information. It'll start to make more sense as you go along. And like I said, definitely reach out and ask me for help if you need it. It's what I'm there for. All right. Good luck, everyone.